After 3 years together, my boyfriend publicly dumped me at my birthday party with a cruel note. I just smiled because he had no idea what secret I was hiding. I stayed calm, cut the cake, and let everyone leave without a word. 8 months later, he was unemployed and begging outside my door while I held our baby. 2 months later, he was drunk outside my house, screaming my name into the cold night air. But it was too late. At my birthday party, I had planned to announce my pregnancy. Instead, my boyfriend handed me a gift box. Inside was a note. I'm leaving you. You're useless, and I deserve better. Everyone laughed as he walked away. Our friends looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I just smiled, because he didn't know what I could do. Let me tell you how we got here. I had been with Justin for just over 3 years, and in the beginning, he seemed like everything I had been waiting for. He was charming and genuinely attentive, actually maintaining eye contact when we talked instead of constantly scanning the room for someone more interesting to engage with. Things moved quickly between us. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was struggling with a laptop that refused to connect to the Wi-Fi, muttering increasingly creative curse words, when this voice behind me asked if I needed help. That was Justin, swooping in like some kind of tech-savvy knight, fixing my connection issues in under 2 minutes. By our first anniversary, we were living together in this cute little apartment we could barely afford. The timing wasn't perfect financially, but rent prices are absolutely ridiculous in this city, no matter when you decide to move. The apartment had huge windows that let in beautiful morning light and hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it felt solid, built on shared dreams and compatible goals. We talked about eventually buying a house, something with a garden where we could grow tomatoes and herbs. We dreamed about traveling to places we'd only seen in magazines. The lavender fields of Provence, the northern lights in Iceland. Justin was always more concerned with appearances than I was, something I should have paid closer attention to as a warning sign. He cared deeply about what car we drove, which restaurants we were seen at, crafting the perfect Instagram posts. He'd spend 20 minutes getting the lighting just right for a simple dinner photo. At the time, I found it endearing. But hindsight is 20 by 20, isn't it? About 4 months ago, I'd been feeling off in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Nauseous in the mornings, exhausted all the time despite getting plenty of sleep, emotional in ways that felt foreign to my usually steady temperament. I found myself crying at commercial ads featuring puppies, feeling overwhelmed by the smell of coffee. My beloved morning ritual suddenly turned into something that made my stomach revolt. I took a pregnancy test, mostly to rule it out. We were careful, but not that careful. 2 pink lines appeared, clear as day, undeniable. I still remember sitting on that cold bathroom floor, staring at that little plastic stick like it was written in hieroglyphics, my whole world shifting on its axis. I spent about a week processing this news before telling anyone. My best friend Barbara was the first to know. She brought wine to our weekly girls' night, and when I stepped to water for the 3rd time that month, she knew immediately. Barbara has this uncanny ability to read people, to see through the masks we wear. She asked all the right questions: what I wanted, how Justin might react, practical things like insurance coverage and maternity leave policies. She helped me organize my chaotic thoughts, writing lists on napkins as we sat in her cozy living room. As for Justin, I decided to wait. My birthday was coming up in 3 weeks, and it seemed like perfect timing. We'd already planned a small party at our apartment with our closest friends, and I thought it would be special to share the news with everyone I loved at once. In my naive mind, I pictured the moment. Clinking glasses, happy tears, congratulations all around. Again, hindsight. What a naive witch I was, believing in fairy tale endings. The weeks leading up to my birthday were strange, filled with an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite place. I was dealing with morning sickness, which should really be called all-day sickness, and trying desperately to hide it from Justin. He didn't notice, which I attributed to him being busy with work. He'd been coming home later, sometimes not until 9 or 10 p.m., claiming overtime and demanding projects. I figured he was stressed about something at the office. How foolish I was to give him the benefit of the doubt. My birthday fell on a Saturday. I spent the morning setting up decorations while Justin went to pick up the cake from our favorite bakery. It was supposed to be a simple task, a 15-minute drive each way, but somehow it took him nearly 3 hours. When I texted asking if everything was okay, he claimed there had been a mix-up with the order. Our friends started arriving around 6 p.m. Barbara and her husband Tom, our friends Aaron and Sergio, my cousin Lana, who was visiting from out of state, and a few others, including Maria, whom I'd known since college. Maria, who would soon reveal herself to be far more than just a friend. The party was going well at first. Good food. I'd made my grandmother's famous spinach lasagna, and Barbara brought her incredible chocolate chip cookies. Plenty of drinks for everyone else, sparkling water disguised as vodka soda for me. Music filling the air, laughter echoing off the walls. I'd planned to make my announcement after we cut the cake, and I kept catching Barbara's eye across the room. She'd give me these little encouraging nods that made my stomach flip with nervous excitement. Around 9 p.m., Justin clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. My heart practically stopped. Had he somehow found out about the pregnancy? Was he going to steal my thunder? He made this whole elaborate speech about how special I was, how lucky he felt to have me in his life, all while looking me directly in the eyes with an intensity that should have warned me something was wrong. Then he handed me a small, beautifully wrapped box with a silk ribbon. The room went quiet, everyone watching with bated breath, some with phones out, ready to capture what they assumed would be a magical moment. I remember thinking it might be an engagement ring, and having the split second of panic about whether I should still announce the pregnancy if he proposed. Then I opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a folded piece of paper. I opened it, confused and already feeling dread creeping up my spine, and read the words that are basically burned into my brain now. I'm leaving you. You're useless. And I deserve better. Your stuff will be packed by Monday. I looked up at him, certain this was some kind of horrible joke, but his expression had completely changed. Cold, distant, almost amused by my shock. Then he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, that we were done, that it had been fun, but he'd outgrown me. And then he laughed, actually laughed, before turning and walking out the front door without another word. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, note trembling in my hand, pregnancy announcement dying in my throat, while our friends looked between me and the door, waiting for someone to yell, just kidding. But nobody did. Barbara was the first to move. She crossed the room, took the note from my trembling hand, read it with growing fury, and muttered that he was an absolute bastard. Then everyone started talking at once, confusion, concern, outrage on my behalf. And me? I just smiled. Not because I wasn't devastated, I was. Not because I wasn't humiliated, I absolutely was. But because in that moment, I realized something crucial. Justin had no idea what was coming. He thought he held all the cards, thought he'd orchestrated this perfect exit where he got to be the powerful one. But he didn't know I was pregnant with his child. He didn't know that I'd found his secret credit card statements 2 weeks earlier when I was looking for a stamp in his desk drawer. He didn't know that I'd already seen the texts on his Apple Watch when he was in the shower. He really should have set up two-factor authentication, LOL. And most importantly, he didn't know that I'm not the kind of woman who falls apart when pushed. I'm the kind who gets strategic. So I smiled. I thanked everyone for coming. I assured them I was okay, I wasn't, and that they didn't need to worry about me, they did. I even cut the birthday cake Barbara had brought and passed out slices as if celebrating the end of something rather than mourning it. Maria left almost immediately, claiming she felt sick. Interesting timing, right? Don't worry, we'll get to her later. The others stayed, helping me clean up and offering places to stay, shoulders to cry on, alibis for murder. Kidding, mostly. By midnight, everyone was gone except Barbara, who insisted on sleeping on my couch despite my protests. Once we were alone, I finally broke down. The pregnancy, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all came crashing down at once. Barbara just held me and let me sob, not trying to fix anything with empty reassurances or those annoying everything happens for a reason platitudes. When I finally calmed down somewhere around 2 a.m., I told Barbara about the pregnancy. She wasn't even surprised, said she'd suspected from how I'd been acting lately. Then I showed her the credit card statements with hotel charges, expensive restaurants, and jewelry purchases that had mysteriously never made their way to me. I scrolled through the screenshots I'd taken of texts to M with heart emojis and plans to meet when I was working late. We both knew exactly who M was, especially after Maria's hasty exit from the party. We stayed up talking until dawn, weighing options, making plans. Barbara asked about telling Justin about the baby, but I was firm. He'd find out eventually, but on my terms when I was ready, not a moment before. As for his affair with Maria and the financial lies, I wasn't going to sink to his level with petty revenge, but I would make sure the truth came out. Barbara looked at me with this mix of concern and admiration as I laid out my thoughts. She commented that I could be scary sometimes when I got that determined look in my eye. I just laughed, a real laugh, the first one since opening that horrible box. That night, as I lay in bed alone for the first time in years, one hand resting on my still flat stomach, I made 2 promises. One to my unborn child that I would provide a stable, loving home no matter what, and one to myself that I would emerge from this stronger than before. Justin thought he was writing the end of our story with that cruel note. And if there's one thing I've learned from all those true crime podcasts I listened to while doing laundry, It's that the best revenge requires patience, planning, and a clear head. All three of which I had in abundance. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and pancakes. Barbara was still there, acting like nothing catastrophic had happened while simultaneously checking on me every 5 minutes. She kept insisting I eat something, obviously concerned about the baby. I managed a few bites before the nausea kicked in. Morning sickness is such a joy. Justin didn't come back that Sunday, which was both a relief and torture. I spent most of the day alternating between numbness, rage, and this weird detached sense of planning. I made lists, so many lists. Financial stuff I needed to sort out, doctor appointments to schedule, people to inform. It was like my brain went into survival mode. Barbara helped me pack up some of Justin's things. Not everything. Just enough to make it clear I wasn't planning on him coming back. The whole time, my phone was blowing up with messages from our friends. Most were supportive, wondering if I was okay. A few were from mutual acquaintances who seemed more interested in gossip than my well-being. And noticeably absent from the concerned chorus? Maria. Monday morning arrived, and I called in sick to work, something I never do, and made an appointment with my doctor to confirm the pregnancy. Around noon, while I was researching tenant rights, I got a text from Justin. I'll be by at 7 to get my things. Make sure you're not there. The audacity, right? I stared at that message for 5 minutes before responding with a simple, no. He immediately called, and I immediately declined. Then I called Barbara, who rallied the troops. By 6:30, my apartment was filled with friends, Aaron, Sergio, Lana, and a couple others. A protective barrier of people who loved me. Justin showed up at 7 on the dot, and his face when he saw the welcoming committee? Priceless. He tried to act tough, but Aaron, who's 6 feet 4 inches and built like a brick wall, just handed him one suitcase with some clothes and essentials. Aaron told him firmly that the rest of his stuff would be available when he arranged a proper time and showed some basic human decency. For now, this was all he was getting. Justin tried to catch my eye where I sat on the couch, deliberately calm. He started saying something about how this was ridiculous. I finally spoke directly to him, telling him he should consider himself lucky I hadn't changed the locks yet, and that we could discuss the rest of his belongings once I'd had time to process his lovely birthday surprise. He started to argue, but something in my expression must have warned him off. He took the suitcase and left, but not before muttering something about me always needing an audience. Rich, coming from the man who dumped me in front of all our friends. After he left, I cried again. Not for him, but for the future I thought we'd have, for the plans that now needed rewriting, for the child who deserved better. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had the locks changed. Now about Maria. I had my suspicions from the moment she bolted from the party, but I needed confirmation. It came from an unexpected source. Sergio texted me Tuesday evening to let me know that Justin and Maria had been seeing each other. He and Aaron had spotted them together 2 months ago at a restaurant across town, but couldn't be sure it wasn't innocent. He apologized profusely for not telling me sooner, said they debated whether to say anything. It was like being punched in the stomach and simultaneously feeling vindicated. I'd known Justin was cheating. The signs were all there. I just hadn't known with whom. Finding out it was Maria, someone who had been in my home, eaten my food, accepted my friendship, someone I'd confided in about relationship troubles, that was a special kind of betrayal that cut deeper than the original affair. Instead of confronting either of them immediately, I decided to wait, watch, gather information. Maybe I've been listening to too many true crime podcasts, but patience really is key in these situations. Knowledge is power, and I was going to need all the power I could get for what was coming. Over the next week, I focused on practical matters with laser-like intensity. I officially confirmed my pregnancy, 10 weeks along, due in late spring. The doctor's appointment felt surreal, discussing due dates and prenatal vitamins while my life was imploding around me. I spoke with a lawyer about the apartment lease and division of assets. Thankfully, we weren't married, so no divorce drama, but there were still complications with shared accounts and belongings that had become entangled over 3 years together. I froze our joint credit card, the one I now knew he'd been using to wine and dine his mistress, and opened a new bank account in just my name. Basic protection stuff that I should have done sooner, but had trusted him not to betray that trust. I also started quietly documenting everything. The credit card statements, the text message, screenshots, dates, and times of his suspicious behavior. If this was going to get ugly, I wanted to be prepared. What I didn't do was tell anyone except Barbara about the pregnancy. Not yet. It wasn't denial. It was strategy. I needed to get my ducks in a row first, understand my options, figure out how I wanted to handle this new reality before dealing with other people's reactions and opinions. 2 weeks after the birthday disaster, Justin texted again, asking to talk things through and collect more of his belongings. The tone was different this time, less demanding, more pleading. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near our apartment. Public place, daytime, on my terms. I wasn't taking any chances with his unpredictable behavior. He looked terrible when I arrived, which gave me a little jolt of satisfaction I'm not proud of but won't apologize for either. Unshaven, circles under his eyes like bruises, wearing a wrinkled shirt that looked like he'd slept in it. He'd already ordered coffee for both of us, a presumptuous move that annoyed me more than it should have, especially since he'd gotten my order wrong. He launched immediately into what I can only describe as a half-assed explanation mixed with what might have been an attempt at an apology. He'd been unhappy for a while, felt trapped in our relationship, thought a clean break would be easier for everyone involved. The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced this speech in the mirror, trying to find the combination that would make him sound like less of a villain. I let him ramble for a while, watching him dig his own grave deeper with every word, before I simply asked if Maria was making him happy. The look on his face? Priceless. Pure deer in headlights shock, like he couldn't believe I'd figured it out so quickly. His mouth actually fell open for a second before he started stumbling through denials that were so transparent, I almost laughed out loud. I cut him off and told him I knew about Maria, about the hotel charges on his secret credit card, about the jewelry he bought her with money we supposedly needed for rent. I asked him to just be honest for once in his life, to give me that much respect after 3 years together. He deflated like a punctured balloon, all the rehearsed confidence draining out of him. He tried the, "it's not what you think" line, but I cut him off again. I told him what mattered now was that he could collect the rest of his things that Saturday at 2 p.m. Aaron would be there to supervise, and after that, I didn't want to hear from him unless it was through my lawyer. His voice actually squeaked when he repeated, "lawyer." He insisted we didn't need lawyers, that we could work things out ourselves like mature adults. The irony of him talking about maturity wasn't lost on me. I stayed calm even as my heart raced, even as part of me wanted to scream at him for destroying everything we'd built together. I told him we were past that point, that he'd made his choice very clear at my birthday party, and I was just respecting his decision. As I stood to leave, he grabbed my wrist, not hard, but desperately, like a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. He asked about the apartment, specifically how I was going to afford it alone, saying my job barely covered half the rent. And that's when the final piece clicked into place, the real reason for his concern for this meeting. It wasn't about closure or collecting his things or even guilt about how he treated me. It was about money. See, what Justin didn't know, or conveniently forgot, is that I'd been covering more than half the rent for the past year. His income had been drying up, his position more precarious than he'd admitted to me or probably even to himself. He'd been living beyond his means, using my steady income as a safety net while presenting himself as the primary provider to our friends and, apparently, to Maria. I smiled sweetly and told him I'd manage just fine, adding that unlike some people, I actually saved money instead of spending it on hotel rooms and jewelry for other women. The color drained from his face as he realized I knew everything, not just about the affair, but about the extent of his financial deception. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in weeks, not because I'd won some relationship battle, but because I finally saw Justin clearly for who he was. A man who cared more about appearances than substance, who lied to make himself seem more successful than he was, who abandoned me the moment I no longer served his carefully constructed narrative. Saturday came, and as arranged, Aaron supervised while Justin collected more of his stuff. I made myself strategically scarce, spending the day at a prenatal yoga class. Highly recommend for anyone dealing with stress during pregnancy, by the way. The instructor was this serene woman named Luna who kept talking about breathing through transitions, which felt almost laughably appropriate given my circumstances. I spent an hour stretching and trying to find my center while my life continued to reorganize itself around me. When I returned home, the apartment felt emptier but somehow more mine. It's amazing how much space someone can take up, not just physically but emotionally, and how different a place feels when their energy is finally gone. I started rearranging furniture that evening, reclaiming the space inch by inch. I moved his oversized leather chair to storage and brought my grandmother's rocking chair in from the bedroom. Small changes, but they mattered more than I expected. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new routine that felt both foreign and increasingly natural. Work, doctor appointments, prenatal vitamins, careful budgeting that accounted for my new reality as a single-income household. I wasn't just surviving, I was planning for a future that looked completely different, but not necessarily worse than what I'd envisioned before. There's something liberating about starting over when you have a clean slate, even if the circumstances that created that slate were painful. I picked up extra freelance work editing social media content on weekends, nothing glamorous, but it helped bridge the financial gap that Justin's departure had created. I also started researching childcare options, maternity leave policies, and all the practical things that come with impending single parenthood. It was overwhelming at times, but also oddly empowering to know I was handling it all myself. As for Justin and Maria, well, their romance wasn't exactly thriving according to the gossip network that is our friend group. Through the grapevine, okay, through Sergio, who heard from his cousin who works at the restaurant where they frequently argued in public, I learned that Maria was growing increasingly unhappy with her prize. Apparently, Justin had painted himself as much more financially stable and emotionally available than he actually was. Big surprise, right? The man who lied to me about everything had also lied to his mistress about everything. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The first real crack in their relationship appeared about a month after our coffee shop meeting. I was at the grocery store, carefully comparing prices on prenatal vitamins. Amazing how expensive growing a human can be, when I literally bumped carts with Maria. What are the odds in a city this size? For a moment, we both froze like deer caught in headlights, neither sure how to handle this unexpected encounter. This time was different though. She wasn't awkward or defensive like I might have expected. She actually seemed relieved to see me, like she'd been carrying around guilt that was too heavy to bear alone, and finally had a chance to set it down. She immediately asked how I was feeling, how things were going, all while looking genuinely interested and concerned rather than just making polite conversation. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. She apologized. Not a rushed, uncomfortable, sorry, not sorry, but a real, thoughtful apology that acknowledged the pain she'd caused and took responsibility for her actions. She explained that Justin had sold her the same story he'd apparently fed multiple women over the years, that we were basically over, just going through the motions until our lease ended, that I was holding him back from his true potential. She found out he'd been seeing another woman while dating her. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Apparently, Justin's idea of monogamy was having only one serious affair at a time, with various smaller deceptions scattered throughout. Maria had discovered text messages and social media interactions that made it clear she wasn't the only other woman in his life. We ended up getting coffee, tea for me, obviously, and having this surreal conversation about the man we both now saw clearly for who he was. Not a monster, necessarily, just a deeply insecure person who needed constant validation from multiple sources and was willing to lie and manipulate to get it. It was almost therapeutic, comparing notes and realizing that his patterns of behavior were consistent across relationships. As we were saying goodbye, Maria mentioned casually that Justin had been let go from his job 2 weeks earlier. She thought I should know since it might affect any financial obligations he had, particularly if there were child support considerations I was dealing with. I thanked her for the information and headed home, processing this new development that explained so much about his recent desperation and financial anxiety. That evening, as I was folding tiny onesies I'd started buying, mostly gender-neutral yellows and greens since I wanted to be surprised, and listening to my favorite true crime podcast, my doorbell rang. I checked the peephole, always check the peephole, folks, especially when you're a pregnant woman living alone, and saw Justin standing there, sober this time, but looking rough around the edges like he hadn't been sleeping well. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in, keeping the chain latch engaged as a physical barrier between us. He started talking immediately, the words tumbling out in a rush like he'd been rehearsing them. He asked if I'd heard about his job, claiming it wasn't his fault, that he was being set up by a coworker who had it out for him. The victim narrative was strong, but I could see through it now in ways I couldn't before. Then he asked if I'd seen Maria recently, his voice tight with suspicion, and something that might have been jealousy. I told him yes, we'd run into each other at Target. His face did this weird thing where it tried to look casual, but just looked constipated instead. He asked what we talked about, and I simply said, you mostly. I wasn't going to lie, but I also wasn't going to give him details he didn't deserve. He did not like that answer. Not one bit. Then he started getting agitated, his voice rising as he said we were probably conspiring against him, that everyone was turning on him when he was just trying to do his best in a difficult situation. The victim complex was strong with this one, and I could see how he'd probably spun similar narratives to other women, painting himself as the misunderstood hero of his own story. I reminded him calmly that he'd created this situation with choices he'd made, and that playing victim wasn't going to work with me anymore. I'd seen behind the curtain now, knew exactly who he was when the charm mask slipped off, and I wasn't going to enable his delusions. That's when he broke down. Not dramatically, not movie-style tears, just crumpled like a house of cards in a strong wind. He said his life was falling apart. No job, no girlfriend, an apartment he could barely afford, and now he'd found out about the baby from Maria of all people. His voice cracked when he said he didn't know how to be a father, didn't know if he was ready for that kind of responsibility. For a brief moment, I felt that old urge to comfort him, to fix things and make everything okay. It's amazing how deeply ingrained those patterns can be, even after someone has hurt you so badly. But then I remembered the cold words in that birthday note. "You're useless. I deserve better." The way he'd laughed when he walked out. The months of lies and betrayal that had led to this moment. Instead of comfort, I offered clarity. I told him he had two paths forward: continue the pity party and lose everything that mattered, or step up, take responsibility for his actions, and rebuild himself into someone worthy of being in our child's life. The choice was entirely his, but I wasn't going to make it for him or enable him to avoid making it. For the first time since this whole mess started, Justin really listened. No interruptions, no excuses, no attempts to deflect blame or change the subject. Just listening, like he was finally hearing me after years of conversations where he'd been waiting for his turn to talk instead of actually processing what I was saying. When I finished, he nodded slowly and asked if we could talk inside, away from the neighbors who were probably getting quite a show. I hesitated for a long moment, weighing the risks, then agreed, but left the door open. Never fully close yourself in with someone whose emotional state is unstable, especially when you're vulnerable. We sat at my kitchen table, and he asked thoughtful questions about the baby for the first time since I'd become pregnant. Not surface level stuff like when is it due or do you know what it is, but real questions about health, development, what kind of support I needed, plans for delivery, and beyond. He asked about my doctor, about whether I was experiencing complications, about how I was handling the emotional stress of everything. As we talked, I realized something important. I no longer felt anything romantic for Justin, but I did want him to be okay, not for his sake, but for our child's. A baby deserves the best version of both parents, even if those parents can't be together, and I was beginning to see glimpses of who Justin might become if he actually committed to personal growth. Before he left, he promised to review the child support agreement I'd had my lawyer draft and find a new job as soon as possible. He also, surprisingly, thanked me for not hating him when I had every right to, and for being willing to have this conversation at all. He said he knew he'd burned most of his bridges, and that he was grateful I was still willing to build something new for the sake of our child. I told him hate takes too much energy, and I was saving my energy for more important things, like preparing to become a mother and building the life I wanted for myself and my baby. The next few weeks brought subtle but significant changes in our dynamic. Justin found a new job, paying less than his previous position, but offering more stability and better benefits. He signed the child support agreement without argument or attempts to negotiate it down. He even enrolled in a parenting class at the community center, something I never would have expected from Mr. I don't need anyone's help, but which gave me hope that he was serious about this transformation. As my due date approached, things felt not perfect, but functional in a way they never had when we were together. Justin and I had established a cautious co-parenting relationship built on clear boundaries and realistic expectations rather than romantic feelings or wishful thinking. He came to doctor appointments when invited, asked thoughtful questions, and took notes like he was studying for the most important test of his life. He helped assemble the crib when I finally admitted defeat with those ridiculous IKEA instructions that seemed designed by someone who'd never actually built furniture. We worked together in my living room, him reading the directions aloud while I sorted screws and argued with wooden panels that refused to fit together properly. It was domestic and peaceful in a way that felt both familiar and completely new. Last week, at 7 months pregnant and showing enough that strangers had started offering me seats on the bus, I received a package from him. Inside was a journal, not expensive or fancy, just simple and practical, with a note that said, "For your thoughts, plans, and all the true crime podcast notes you want to write, you were never useless. I was just too self-absorbed to see your value, and I'm sorry it took losing you to realize that." I didn't respond to the note. Some things don't need acknowledgement, and I wasn't ready to forgive him just because he'd finally started seeing clearly. But I did start using the journal, mostly to document this journey, so I can someday tell our child the complicated, messy, very human story of how they came to be, and how sometimes people can change if they're willing to do the work. And now, here we are. Little Zoe arrived 6 weeks ago, weighing 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her father's chin. The only feature of it is, I'm not mad about her inheriting, to be completely honest. Labor was. Well, let's just say all those YouTube birth vlogs I binged during my third trimester did not prepare me for the reality. 32 hours, people. 32 hours of wondering if I was actually going to die from the pain, while also being amazed by what my body was capable of enduring. The funny thing is, during those endless hours of contractions that felt like my body was being torn apart and rebuilt from the inside out, I kept thinking about how much I'd changed since that birthday party from hell 8 months ago. I'd gone from being a woman standing in shock with a breakup note in my hand to bringing a whole human being into the world through sheer force of will and biological determination. Life comes at you fast, doesn't it? Sometimes it feels like you're barely keeping up, and then suddenly you realize you've become someone completely different, hopefully someone stronger. Justin was actually at the hospital for the birth, which surprised pretty much everyone, including me. I hadn't expected him to show up, given his track record with difficult situations, but he appeared in the delivery room at hour 26 of my labor looking terrified and determined in equal measure. He brought this massive teddy bear that literally wouldn't fit through the door of my hospital room. Seriously, where did he think we were going to put that thing in my one-bedroom apartment? But the gesture was sweet in its complete impracticality. He stayed through the waiting, through my not-so-ladylike screaming that probably traumatized the other patients, through all of it. Barbara was my rock, though, the person I'd called when the contractions started, and who'd driven me to the hospital at 3 a.m. without complaint. When things got really intense, and I was convinced I couldn't do it anymore, that my body was going to give out, she was right there holding my hand and reminding me that I was already doing it, that I was stronger than I knew. Justin mostly hovered awkwardly in the corner, scrolling through his phone during the calmer moments, and occasionally asking if I needed anything, which, I mean, at least he was trying to be helpful. When the pain got really bad, around hour 28, when I was convinced this baby was never coming out, he actually stepped up and held my other hand, letting me squeeze until I'm pretty sure I cut off his circulation completely. When Zoe finally arrived, after what felt like an eternity of pushing and breathing and cursing like a sailor, and they placed her slippery, screaming, perfect little body on my chest, I had this moment of pure clarity that cut through the exhaustion and pain. Everything we go through, all the heartbreak, betrayal, uncertainty, fear, it all led to her. And I wouldn't change a single step of the journey if it meant she wouldn't exist exactly as she is. Justin cried when he held her for the first time. Not movie star tears rolling gracefully down his cheeks, but this awkward, trying not to, but can't help it, kind of crying that made his nose run and his face blotchy. It was the most genuine emotion I'd seen from him in our entire relationship. And for a moment I glimpsed who he might have been if he'd learned to be honest about his feelings earlier. The first few weeks at home were a blur of diaper changes, feeding struggles, and sleep deprivation, unlike anything I've ever experienced, even during finals week in college. My mom came to stay for 2 weeks, which was both a blessing and a challenge. She kept reorganizing my kitchen cabinets because apparently my system makes no sense, and she had opinions about everything from how I was swaddling the baby to what temperature I kept the apartment. But having an extra pair of hands and someone to talk to during those long, surreal nights when time seems to lose all meaning was invaluable. Justin has been surprisingly present throughout this adjustment period. Not in a live and father way, we're nowhere near ready for that level of integration, but he comes by 3 times a week for scheduled visits that have become a routine Zoe seems to recognize. Sometimes he brings genuinely useful things like diapers, formula, or takeout from my favorite Thai place when I'm too exhausted to cook. Other times he brings ridiculous baby clothes that are completely impractical, but admittedly adorable. Last week it was a tiny leather jacket for a 6-week-old baby. I didn't have the heart to tell him she'll outgrow it before the weather's even cool enough to wear it. Our co-parenting relationship is still evolving, finding its rhythm like a dance where we're both learning the steps as we go. We have moments of tension, especially when he shows up late because of work stuff or cancels last minute when something important comes up. But we also have moments where it feels almost normal, like when he noticed I was struggling with a clogged milk duct, if you know, and actually researched remedies online. Then showed up the next day with cabbage leaves and the heating pad. Financially, things have settled into a workable routine that doesn't leave me lying awake at night wondering how I'll pay rent. Justin pays his child support on time. So far, knock on wood, and I've been able to work from home part-time doing social media management for small businesses. It's not my dream career, but it pays the bills and lets me be with Zoe during these precious early months. Not getting rich, but we're comfortable, and that's more than I thought would be possible when I was standing alone in my apartment 8 months ago. The apartment feels completely different now, transformed by the presence of this tiny person who somehow takes up more space than her father ever did. Justin's belongings are gone, replaced by baby gear that multiplies like rabbits, swings, bouncers, play mats, and an alarming number of stuffed animals that well-meaning friends keep bringing. I repainted the living room this soft sage green that makes me happy every time I walk into the room. It's amazing how much your surroundings affect your mood, and I wanted this space to reflect hope rather than heartbreak. Maria and I still run into each other occasionally. Our city really isn't that big, and we apparently shop at the same grocery stores. It's less awkward now, more like encountering a distant acquaintance than someone who fundamentally altered the trajectory of my life. Last time I saw her, she was with some bearded guy who kept calling her babe every 3 seconds in that performative way that suggests a relationship that's trying too hard. She seemed happy, a little forced about it, and I genuinely hope she is. We all deserve happiness, even if we sometimes make terrible choices getting there. As for Justin, he's still struggling in some ways with the transition to this new version of himself. His new job isn't going great, according to Barbara, who heard from Aaron, who plays basketball with Justin's coworker. Got to love small city gossip networks that make privacy impossible. He moved into this depressing studio apartment that he's constantly complaining about, but at least he's paying his own rent now, instead of depending on someone else to subsidize his lifestyle. Sometimes when he comes to see Zoe, I catch him looking around my place with this expression that's hard to read. Nostalgia mixed with regret, maybe? Sometimes I think he realizes what he threw away when he handed me that note, but it's too late for that kind of reflection to change anything fundamental between us. The weirdest development has been Justin's apparent personal growth journey, which feels both genuine and somehow performative at the same time. He mentioned he's been seeing a therapist, which, wow. This is the guy who once told me therapy was just paying someone to listen to you whine about problems you should solve yourself. He's been reading parenting books and even joined some dad group on Facebook where they apparently discuss everything from diaper brands to developmental milestones. Sometimes I wonder if aliens abducted the real Justin and left this more self-aware pod person in his place. Anyway, my own life has taken some unexpected turns that I never could have predicted when I was planning that pregnancy announcement. Remember how I mentioned working part-time from home? That actually came through a connection from Sergio, who recommended me to his sister's company after hearing about my situation. The work is interesting. I help small businesses develop their social media presence, and the people are nice. Most importantly, I can do it while Zoe naps, assuming she actually decides napping is on her agenda that day. And then there's Eli. Yes, there's an Eli now. And before you ask, no, this isn't some rebound situation where I'm trying to replace what I lost. He's the delivery guy who kept bringing my grocery orders during those first chaotic weeks postpartum, when leaving the house felt like an impossible undertaking. At first, I barely registered him beyond thank you and please put the bags by the door. Hello, new mom zombie mode where basic human interaction becomes challenging. But he started adding little handwritten notes to my deliveries, recommending items other parents had found helpful, or sometimes just a dad joke that would make me snort laugh, even in my sleep-deprived state. One day, when I was particularly frazzled, hadn't showered in 3 days, pretty sure there was spit up in my hair, wearing the same milk-stained shirt for the third day running, he dropped off my order and asked if I wanted him to help carry the cases of water to my kitchen. I hesitated, strange man in my apartment, and all that, but something about him felt safe. Maybe it was the way he didn't even blink at my disaster appearance or the crying baby in the background. As he helped put away the groceries, we started talking. Turns out he's finishing his degree in environmental science, delivering groceries to pay for school and support himself. He has a younger sister with 2 kids that he helps care for regularly, which explains why he didn't run screaming from my disaster zone of an apartment or seem fazed by the chaos that comes with a newborn. We exchanged numbers in case there were any issues with future deliveries. We both knew that was complete BS, but it was a comfortable fiction that let us pretend this was purely professional rather than the beginning of something neither of us was quite ready to name. We've been texting sporadically, and he's come by for coffee a few times when Zoe was being cooperative about her sleep schedule. It's nothing serious. I'm in no rush to dive into another relationship, especially with a 6-week-old baby who requires most of my attention and energy. But it's nice to talk to an adult who doesn't want to discuss diaper brands or sleep training methods, who talks about things like renewable energy and his plans to work for the National Park Service after graduation. It's refreshing to remember there's a whole world out there beyond baby bottles and burp cloths. Last week, when Justin came for his scheduled visit, Eli was just leaving after helping me install a new car seat. Apparently I'd been doing it wrong for weeks, which is terrifying in retrospect. The look on Justin's face was complicated, surprise, maybe a little jealousy, definitely confusion about what this guy was doing in what used to be his space. Later, he casually asked who that was, trying to sound nonchalant but failing completely. I kept it vague, partly because there's not much to tell yet, and partly because it's not really his business anymore. He made a few comments about moving on fast, before seeming to catch himself and backing off. Barbara thinks I should go for it with Eli, but I'm taking it day by day, moment by moment. After everything that's happened, I've learned that rushing into things never ends well, and I have more than just myself to consider now. Besides, Zoe is my priority right now, and dating as a single mom is a whole different ballgame with rules I'm still learning. Speaking of Barbara, she's been my constant through all of this upheaval and transformation. When I'm overwhelmed and convinced I'm failing at motherhood, which happens more often than I'd like to admit. She brings over iced coffee, my first love that's finally back in my life now that breastfeeding is going better, and reminds me that all new parents feel like they're drowning sometimes. She takes Zoe for a few hours when I need to shower, nap, or just stare at a wall in blessed silence while remembering who I used to be before I became someone's entire world. Yesterday was actually my birthday. 1 year since the box that changed everything, since Justin handed me that note and walked out of what I thought was our shared future. Instead of dwelling on that memory or the pain it caused, I had a small gathering at my place. Barbara and her husband, Aaron and Sergio, my cousin Lana who'd driven down for the occasion, and a few other close friends who've stuck by me through this whole journey. Justin stopped by briefly to drop off a gift, a surprisingly thoughtful bracelet with Zoe's birthstone, but didn't stay for the party. He seems to understand that some boundaries are necessary for everyone's peace of mind and emotional health. As I looked around at my little apartment filled with people who truly care about me, at my daughter sleeping peacefully in her bassinet oblivious to the adults celebrating around her, at the life I've built from the ashes of what I thought I wanted, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the strength I discovered in myself, for the clarity that came from having my illusions stripped away, for the opportunity to rebuild myself into someone I actually like. I don't know what the future holds, and I've learned to be okay with that uncertainty. Maybe Eli will become something meaningful, or maybe he'll just be a brief, kind chapter in the story I'm still writing. Maybe Justin will continue growing into a decent co-parent, or maybe he'll revert to old patterns when the novelty of fatherhood wears off. Maybe I'll stay in this apartment forever, creating memories in these rooms that have seen so much change. Or maybe I'll eventually find a house with a yard for Zoe to play in when she's old enough to run around and explore the world. What I do know is that I'm not the same woman who stood holding that note on her birthday last year. That woman was shattered but determined, broken but not beaten. This woman is rebuilt, stronger at the broken places, like those Japanese pottery pieces repaired with gold that become more beautiful than they were before the damage occurred. So I guess if there's any moral to this long, messy, complicated story, it's that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best version of yourself. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. Sometimes you have to fall completely apart before you can put yourself back together in a way that actually makes sense, in a configuration that serves who you're becoming rather than who you used to be. Yes. If you're wondering what happened to that giant teddy bear Justin brought to the hospital, it's currently serving as a barricade to keep Zoe from rolling off my bed when I need to put her down for 2 seconds to pee or grab something. So I guess it found its purpose after all, just not the one he intended. For those asking what happened to the infamous breakup note, I kept it. It's in a memory box in Zoe's closet, along with her hospital bracelet, first lock of hair, and the positive pregnancy test that started this whole journey. Someday, when she's old enough to understand complex human emotions and relationship dynamics, we'll tell her the whole story, not to burden her with our drama, but because it's part of her history too, part of the complicated path that led to her existence. Sometimes I take out that note and read it again, not out of masochism or an inability to let go, but as a reminder of how far I've come. You're useless, and I deserve better. Those words that once shattered me now feel like they belong to someone else's story, like echoes from a life I used to live. Because I know now what I couldn't see then. I was never useless. I was just with someone too small to see my worth, too insecure to appreciate what was right in front of him. And as for deserving better, well, I got exactly that, just not in the way either of us expected. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about these things. Sometimes the worst gift you can receive turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you, wrapped in the most painful packaging imaginable.